Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Now let's start with the story. It was sometime in late 1973, maybe late September or early October, when I first started getting feelers from the Callahan brothers about whether I'd be interested in selling my business to them. Felix and Reed Callahan had once worked for Brady back when he was just starting out on his own. They'd had a falling out with Brady after Felix and him got into a shoving match that nearly turned into a full fight. Reed was ready to jump in on his brother's side, but the rest of Brady's crew held him back. Seeing he wouldn't get any backup, Felix backed off, collected what money was owed, and left with Reed. About a month later, they launched their own logging business, going around like I was, selling firewood to larger home heating suppliers. Over the years, I ran into one or the other of them, usually when they were trying to poach one of my delivery accounts. Generally, customers who bought coal and heating oil were loyal to suppliers who treated them well over time. Every now and then, though, one of my accounts would switch to the Callahans either because they offered a lower price or because the customers felt I wasn't catering to them properly. I never worried much about losing accounts to them since I always had more business than I could handle. I could usually replace any lost account within days. Brady, meanwhile, was used to being outbid on logging jobs by the Callahans. He wasn't happy about it, but since many of those jobs were public bids open to anyone, there wasn't much he could do. By the 1970s, the Callahan brothers were running about 20 small logging crews and had around 10 delivery trucks operating across 3 states. My firewood delivery business was starting to shrink. New homes were mostly built with central heating and propane or natural gas. Fireplaces were mostly decorative now, not primary heat sources. I was still selling plenty of firewood, but my customers were selling smaller loads and offering free delivery and stacking just to stay competitive. The business was changing, and not for the better. It would have been a good time to sell if it hadn't meant leaving Brady at the mercy of the Callahans. After ignoring their initial feelers for a couple of months, Felix and Reed came to Groton to visit me. Like me, they were in their early 30s, though Felix was a few years older about Brady's age. They didn't waste time reminiscing. Felix did the talking, cutting straight to the point. "Jade, we're either buying you out today or running you out of business soon anyway. This market can't support everyone. Reed and I will pay you $75,000 for everything: your trucks, drivers, and customers. You and Brady can keep that fancy furniture side project of yours. That's our offer. No sweetening it. What do you say?" I knew I wasn't going to sell to those two, but I wanted to hear how far ahead they'd planned. "What about Brady?" "Screw Brady. We don't care about him one way or the other. If he can find places to sell his wood, we won't bother him. Hell, you can even help him, as long as you stay away from the customers we're buying from you. You better take our offer, Jade. Otherwise, you might find bad things happening to your trucks and drivers. You're getting out of the business one way or another. Might as well do it smart. Look, guys, I appreciate you coming to me with an offer. I need to take a few days and talk it over with my wife before I can give you an answer. I've been thinking of selling anyway, but I thought I could get at least $100,000 for the equipment, customers, and the goodwill. Are you sure that $75,000 is your best offer?" "That's it. And that's only if you sell today. In a few days you'll wish that you took it when you had the chance." "All right. If I have to give you my answer today, then it has to be a no. Felix, if I were you, I'd think twice about threatening me or my drivers. If anything happens to the drivers or the trucks, I'll be over to square it up with you myself. I've let you a-holes go around slashing your prices to steal away my accounts for a long time, and I didn't say anything because it was so stupid for you to do it. How can you raise up your prices on any of them without them coming back over to me? Or at least giving me a phone call?" I moved in closer to Felix as I was talking. I was hoping he'd make some kind of move so I could knock him on his butt. He backed away from me a little. "How about it, Reed? You agree with your brother about putting me out of business if I refuse to sell?" "Jade, I thought you'd see that this was a good, fair offer. Felix didn't mean what he said about that other stuff. We're businessmen, not thugs. Felix watches too much television, that's all. If you don't want to sell, then we'll just undercut you on price until you can't compete. There's no need for that other stuff. Come on, Felix, let's go home." Jade's not interested. Reed was the smart one. He knew enough not to make any threats himself. As soon as they were gone, I drove over to Brady's to let him know what had happened. As I expected, Brady was excited at the prospects the Callahans had offered. Brady was always more bloodthirsty than I was. He had matured in some ways as he got older, but not to the point where he didn't enjoy a good scrap. His advice was that the two of us go over to the Callahans and make them an offer of our own. Brady's basic argument was that he didn't want to see anybody innocent get hurt, like Lenny or one of the other drivers. If we waited, he asserted, they'd have at least one free crack at doing just that. What it comes down to is, who do you want to protect? Those shitheads or your employees who depend on you to look after them? If you don't go over there and put the fear into them, they'll work themselves into believing that you'll fold up your tent if they give you a little push. It would be a damn shame if something bad happened because we didn't show them that they're mistaken soon enough. I'll admit to you that I was a little pissed myself at them having the gall to come over thinking that they could strong-arm me in the first place. Maybe I'll even admit that I hadn't fully grown up either and wasn't above getting a little excited at the prospect of kicking both those bozos' butts. I'd like to think that my main reason was to try to avert violent injury being done to one or more of my employees. I made Brady promise to sleep on it overnight and to not mention anything to Tessa. I told him that if we both agreed on going to see them in the morning, then that is what we'd do. Brady was grinning when I left his farm. He said he'd call me in the morning to let me know whether he'd changed his mind or not. He woke me up at 4:30 the next morning, telling me that he'd meet me in New London at 6. I just laughed when he asked me whether I'd had a change of heart about it. It would have been too cruel to do that to him after letting him get his hopes up overnight. We arranged to meet in the supermarket parking lot in New London that we sometimes used if we were going somewhere together in one car. I got there at about 5:45, and Brady was already parked and waiting for me. He jumped in my car and asked if I wanted to stop somewhere and grab some breakfast. I'd gotten some coffee before I left the house, but I figured a nice breakfast would be a good idea before we went over to the house where the Callahans lived. Felix was married and had a few kids, but Reed still lived with all of them. Reed had almost married a girl right after high school, but something came up and they called it off at the last minute. She had gotten married to someone else a few months later, and Reed had stayed single ever since. We were sitting in the diner finishing off a big breakfast, and Brady was telling me that he'd prefer to be the one that took Felix on if it was all the same to me. He's the kind of guy I just can't stand, Jade. He's got a big mouth until somebody stands up to him, and then he'll back down if he doesn't have a lot of help behind him. You'll see. After today, he'll stay so far away from us, it will be like he's disappeared. Reed stays close to his brother, so you won't see either of them after today. I hope Brady was right, and I actually felt like he was. There are some people that you just believe when they tell you something bad is going to happen to you. People like my father and Brady, and I hoped, at least to some extent, that I could include me too in that category. Felix wasn't like that. At least he wasn't like that to me. We were parked outside Felix's house by 7 o'clock, just waiting for them to come out. Brady was leaning against my front fender, his arms folded in front of him and a patient smile on his face. If you knew Brady at all, you would be able to see how happy he was being there. I stayed inside the car, content to let Brady's presence speak for my intentions. What happened next really surprised me. Felix sent his wife out to talk with us. She walked right over to Brady, wearing a housecoat and slippers. She'd put a scarf over her hair. It was a fairly cold day, and she wasn't really dressed for it. Is your name Brady? She had come up to within about 10 feet of him when she spoke. I'm Sheila Callahan, Felix's wife. He said to tell you that he doesn't want any trouble here at the house. He asked me to find out where you two want to meet him and read. Brady just looked at her, not changing that little grin on his face at all. After she had quit talking, Brady yelled over at the house. Hey Felix, you're still the biggest coward I ever met. You send your old lady out here hoping to shoo me away so you and that chicken shit brother of yours can sneak off somewhere and hide out from me and Jade? Your kids must really be proud of their father, that's all I can say. Why don't you just come out here and act like you are a man, and come tell me screw you to my face? Brady really knew how to put scorn in his voice. He was also loud enough to wake up the neighbors. You may as well come out, Felix, unless you don't care if the whole neighborhood knows that you're a coward. I'll tell you what, you come on out with Reed, and I'll kick both of your butts all by myself at the same time. I'm not leaving until you either come out or call the police for protection. So what's it going to be, shithead? Sheila, it must be pretty awful being married to that worthless piece of shit. You ever made love with a real man? When Brady got started, he wasn't real good about setting limits and not going over the limits of common decency. My father was even worse, but neither of them cared about things like that when they had the adrenaline flowing. Predictably, that last thing got Felix to at least come out to his front porch. I'm warning you, Blackwell, you keep a civil tongue in front of my family. Or else what, Felix? You going to sick your mother on me? Come down off your porch and let's you and I settle this thing right now. Bring Reed, I don't care. Jade will stay in the car. I could see Reed looking out the front window at Brady and I. He didn't look like he was going to be coming out anytime soon. Come on, Felix. If you don't come down soon, you'll never be able to keep living in this neighborhood. You want your kids teased by all the other kids in the neighborhood about how big a chicken shit you are? I don't know if Felix had been going to come down or not before Brady started talking about his kids, but right after that, he charged down off the porch, coming right at Brady. Brady moved over, forward, and to his left, to get away from the car and from Felix's wife. When the two men closed together, it sounded like two stags colliding head-on. Both of them went down in a tangled heap, but Brady was on top of Felix when they finally came to rest. He started to punch Felix's face over and over, with a fury that caused me to jump up out of my car and run over to break it up. I was afraid that Brady would kill Felix. If Reed hadn't come running out the door with a pistol, I think the whole thing might have just ended right there. Brady still had his temper up, and I had my hands full trying to get him over to the car. When I saw Reed with the gun, I let Brady go so that the two of us could get away from there. I figured that Brady would know how dangerous guns could be from his experience with Tessa and would want to get as far away from Reed as I did. Instead of doing that, Brady put his head down and charged right at Reed. I heard one shot, and then Brady was on him. In 10 seconds, Reed was unconscious and Brady was pounding his head with his fists. I pulled Brady off of Reed and could see that he'd been shot in the shoulder area and was bleeding. His eyes were crazy, and he was practically incoherent in his anger. I thought he was going to lash out at me, and I started yelling to him to be still because he'd been shot. At some point my words must have penetrated, because Brady started checking himself out to see where he'd been hit. I took off my jacket and started ripping at my undershirt trying to get something to stem the flow of blood. The bullet had gone right through him, because he was bleeding out of his back too. He went down to his knees, and I finally had enough of my undershirt ripped up that I could press pieces to each of his wounds. I was yelling at Felix's wife to call for an ambulance, but she just stood there. I think she might have been in shock from all the sudden violence. I was holding onto the compress I'd put on the wounds when I felt something hit me on the back of my head, and I went flying face first into the grass. I turned around and saw Felix standing there trying to decide whether he wanted to come after me or after Brady. I managed to get most of the way up before he decided that I was the one he had to dispose of first. I caught part of his kick with my chest, but I had his leg in my hands and was able to twist it and send him down on the ground, with me falling on top of him. Since it had worked so well with Brady, I decided to just punch his face until he stopped moving. I got back up after I was sure that Felix would stay put and went back to tend to Brady. I don't know how long we were all out there before a fire truck and a couple police cars pulled up in the street. The fire people looked over all four of us, and then they sent off for 2 ambulances. I, being in the best shape of the 4, was arrested, handcuffed, and put in the back seat of one of the police cars. It only took about 5 minutes for the first ambulance to get there, and they took Brady away by himself. By the time the second ambulance pulled up, Reed was on his feet and telling the attendants to take care of Felix first. When the ambulance left with Felix, the police arrested Reed too and brought us both to the station house in separate vehicles. I used my phone call to get a hold of my father and told him where I was. He told me to just sit tight and not to make any statements until he got there with Mr. Beckett and a lawyer for Brady and I. They put me in a holding cell and had Reed somewhere else. I figured that Brady and I were in a lot of trouble since the whole thing had taken place on Felix's front lawn. I didn't think Brady's wound was that serious, but I had no medical training and didn't know what the bullet might have hit before it exited. It took another 3 hours before I got called up and processed into the jail. I was photographed and fingerprinted and formally booked on attempted murder charges. As soon as I was booked in, I was bailed out. Mr. Beckett had found a judge to set my bail at $5,000. Brady had been taken to the hospital and had a policeman on the door of his hospital room. Mr. Beckett had brought a real young guy as my lawyer. He must have been pretty good though, or Mr. Beckett wouldn't have brought him. As soon as I got out of jail, we all drove over to Felix's house, and I picked up my car. My father had sent Janos to pick up Tessa and the kids and bring them over to the hospital. Mr. Beckett told me to just go in and see Brady for a few minutes if I could, and to tell him the same thing my father told me about not saying anything about what had happened. They wouldn't let me in to see Brady, but they let Tessa in before they moved him out of emergency care. I told her to tell him not to say anything, but she just gave me a dirty look. I didn't know whether the look was because she thought I'd talked Brady into this thing, or because she thought Brady didn't need to be told to not make any statements. It was probably as little of both. Once Tessa came out after talking with Brady's doctors, she told us that they said that Brady was probably going to be okay. I decided to drive home and face Elise. I knew she wasn't going to be happy with the events of the past 2 days. I was right again. As I had expected, Elise was really hacked at me for getting into that whole mess. When I told her that Brady was in the hospital because he had been shot, she made me back up and start from the beginning. Elise is a fidgety woman. The more upset she gets, the more she just has to start moving around, touching things, and keeping her hands and legs busy. By the time I was done telling her everything up to the point of me being out on bail, she had twisted up the cloth on the kitchen table until it looked like it was more off the table than on. I know you aren't stupid, Jade, but sometimes it sure seems like you are. I can understand Brady wanting to go over to New London and confront those men, but I can't understand how you let him talk you into going with him. How do you think Tessa felt when Janos came over to tell her that Brady was in the hospital after being shot? At least it wasn't her that shot him this time. I have this very annoying habit of trying to make jokes when I'm under stress. Elise says it is one of my least lovable characteristics. I could see from her expression that I wasn't helping my cause any with that last comment. Elise, Brady's going to be okay. If the charges were really serious, do you think I'd be out on such a small bail amount? If you think about it the right way, you'll see that Brady and I didn't really have another choice. We couldn't allow the Callahans to try to move us out of our business by hurting our drivers or sabotaging the equipment. Brady and I both thought that if we confronted them right away that they'd back down and forget about their plans to take us over. We had no idea the Reed was crazy enough to come out of the house with a pistol. Well, it's a big mess now, and I don't want you doing anything else to make it bigger. I mean it, Jade. You end it right now before somebody winds up getting killed. The business isn't worth your life or Brady's either. You both can do something else. Elise, I hope you don't really mean that. There's just no way I'd allow those two a-holes to tell me what I can or can't do in my business. It may not mean that much to you, but that business is what makes our lives possible. That goes for Brady and Tessa and the kids too. We didn't build this thing up, Brady and I, just to run away and hide the first time somebody came around wanting to take away what we've built. I'm not going to end this thing until those a-holes decide that they've bitten off way more than they can chew. You always find some way to convince yourself that what you want to do is the right thing to do. It doesn't matter to you that your decisions affect a lot of other people who would prefer to approach things differently. You just like to go around showing people how tough you are. I'm surprised you and Brady don't get into trouble even more often the way the two of you think. Go get cleaned up and change out of those clothes. I've got to call Tessa and see if she and the kids need anything. Brady got released from the hospital the next morning. Except for some bandages, you'd never had known he'd been shot and badly injured the day before. Elise and I were sitting in his kitchen out at the farm having coffee and some donuts that Elise had made me stop for. Tessa was in the other room getting the kids settled back down. The school had let out for some reason, and all four of them were home. Little Brady was good about helping with his brother and sisters, but four of them was a lot to be having in one living room all at the same time. Jade, you think those Callahans learned their lesson yet? Brady was like a kid, and I knew he was just dying for the two of us to relive the day before with traded accounts of what each of us had seen at the same time. I would have gone along with him if Elise hadn't been sitting right there between us. I can't believe that Reed actually had the balls to pull the trigger. I think he was more surprised by it than we were. I don't know about Brady, but I was more surprised that he'd gone running after a man with a gun than I was that the man with a gun had fired it. I know I wouldn't have run after Reed if I had been Brady. Brady, Elise is right. We need to figure out some intelligent way to end all this. We can't be going around calling people out for a butt kicking like when we were kids. I think we should have a regular meeting with the Callahans someplace where there isn't going to be any trouble and sit down and talk. Now I mostly said that to let Elise know I could be mature and responsible. I also pretty much knew what Brady's response was going to be, and I always liked getting him riled up because he was so much fun to listen to when he was venting. I smiled over at Elise when I said that. Brady tried not to react, knowing what I was up to. I could see him exerting some self-control because the tension was in his face and in his rapidly changing coloring. He was fighting his own nature, though, and it didn't take long for that nature to win out. Are you nuts? They don't want to work things out with us. They want to put us out of business. They came to you, Jade, because they knew that if they came to me, I'd have kicked their butts as soon as they suggested their shit. Too bad they didn't have as much respect for you. Now that it's all out in the open, we should just go back out there and finish it with them. I hope you don't think, for even 1 minute, that I'm about to let that Reed Callahan just get away with shooting me. I'll do it myself, Jade, if you've lost the stomach for it. Brady, I'm out on bail right now for attempted murder for Christ's sake, and I didn't do anything but pull you up off of Felix and Reed. I'm pretty sure that your turn is coming next. Reed was charged with something too, I think, like discharging a firearm within the city limits. If it was as simple as us meeting them somewhere and kicking their butts, I'd be all for it. It isn't like that, though, and I think Reed demonstrated that they won't just sit back and allow us to beat on them. So that's it then? You're just going to hand everything over to them and walk away? The look Brady sent me was one of total disbelief, and I could see his respect for me was in danger of faltering as well. No, Brady, that's what Elise would do, but she's not making the decisions. You and I are. These are our businesses we're talking about here, our livelihoods, the way we feed ourselves and take care of our families. We built them up ourselves, and we need to protect them, even if it winds up costing us a lot. If Tessa and Elise think there's a better way, they should run over to the Callahans and talk with Felix's wife. If the women can settle it, then I say let them. I was trying to get a rise out of Elise, tweaking her for stepping into an area that she didn't really understand. In my wildest imaginings, I wouldn't have thought that she and Tessa would pick up on that idea and run with it. If I had thought about what it was I was saying before I spoke, I wouldn't have opened my mouth. Tessa and I couldn't make a bigger mess of it than you two have. I think you finally had a good idea, Jade, and if Tessa is willing, I'd like to give it a try. She got up and walked out to the living room, and, as she left, Brady gave me a very unhappy look. Both of us knew that I'd messed up by letting the women get their noses under our business tent. In a matter of 3 or 4 minutes, Tessa and Elise were back in the kitchen making plans for setting up this meeting and arranging for Tessa's sister April to come over to watch the kids when they went to their big peace meeting. They spoke about where they should hold it and what they would wear. If it hadn't been so scary, it would have been laughable. Before we got up and left, Tessa and Elise had agreed on what outfit each of them would wear and decided that they would let Sheila Callahan select the meeting place. Elise elected herself to be the one to phone Sheila within the next day or two to try to arrange the meeting. Brady and I went outside before Elise and I left, supposedly so Brady could show me a fungus he'd noticed attached to some of his birch trees in the back of the property, but really so that we could come up with a little plan of our own for how we were going to finish this thing with the Callahan brothers. Brady thought we should get a couple guns of our own, just in case, but I was able to convince him that that would not be a good idea from a legal point of view. Brady told me that Mr. Beckett and my father were both working on a plan to keep Brady from being arrested for the last little set to on the Callahan's front yard. Mr. Beckett wanted Brady to go down and file assault charges against both the brothers so that Brady would have more leverage to keep himself from being charged. Brady didn't want to do it because he thought it made him look like he was afraid of Reed and Felix and wanted or needed protection from them. I told Brady that he should do what Mr. Beckett wanted unless he thought he'd want to try to get through all this alone. Mr. Beckett seemed always to know exactly what was needed to keep his friends from getting jammed up with unfavorable interpretations of their actions. When I reminded Brady that he still owed Mr. Beckett for his assistance after Tessa shot him, he frowned and then agreed to go down and do what Mr. Beckett had told him to. So what have you and Brady been cooking up now, Jade? Don't lie to me either, because I know you too well. Brady didn't want to go down and file charges against Felix and Reed. He thinks it makes him look afraid of them. I told him he had to do what Mr. Beckett advised if he wanted to keep getting his help in things like this. He finally agreed to do it, but only after I reminded him of the last time he needed Mr. Beckett's help, when Tessa decided to use him for target practice. And what else? And we both decided we didn't want to carry guns to protect ourselves from things. Jade, I know you think all of this is fun and games, but it isn't. I don't want to think about something bad happening to you or Brady, but it could if this thing keeps going. I want you to promise to give Tessa and I a chance to get this all settled. Will you do that? If we can't help it, then I'll listen to you if you have some other ideas. Elise, I promise to let you try this thing, but I'm not going to promise anything if the Callahans decide to go ahead in the meantime and do something on their own. Okay, that's fair. Just don't have you and Brady go out and make things worse before we try our way. A couple days later, Elise and Tessa and the kids went over to New London and met with Sheila Callahan and her 3 kids in a playground over by the Coast Guard Academy. Sheila had picked the playground and bringing the kids because she felt that women wouldn't try anything with their children around. At the meeting, the 3 women sat and talked and watched as their children played on the swings and monkey bars. Little Brady, who was the oldest by several years, took turns pushing all the smaller children on the swings. Elise told me that Sheila was as upset about everything that happened as Tessa and her were. The problem from Sheila's point of view was that Felix wouldn't listen to her about anything concerning business. After seeing Brady, she told Tessa that he was a very scary man. Tessa told her about the time that she'd had to shoot him twice to get him off of her front porch. Tessa then told Sheila that she was worried that her Brady was going to kill Felix and Reed because he felt they represented a threat to his family. She told Sheila that she hoped that Felix and Reed could convince Brady that they weren't a threat because Brady didn't have much patience and wouldn't wait too long before going ahead with what he thought was necessary. Elise then said that she thought I would help Brady if it came to that. I love Jade, but he is very bullheaded, just like his father and Brady too. I shouldn't tell you this, but it wouldn't be the first time for either of them. I made Jade promise me that he wouldn't kill your husband for at least a week so that we women could try to work something out ourselves. Jade and Brady may both be killers, but they'd never lie to us about important stuff like that. You should at least try to talk to your husband and brother-in-law. If they won't listen, then that's their funeral, and you at least could feel like you did all you could. As she was replaying this conversation to me, I almost couldn't believe what she was telling me. I thought she was just kidding, but she told me that she and Tessa had both agreed that Sheila had to be persuaded to get tough with Felix and to make him see that he wasn't the only one willing to take action to get what he wanted. Besides, Jade, you and Brady probably would kill them if you felt like you had to. So we weren't really lying, were we? I didn't answer her, but that probably served as confirmation of what she had said. I wanted her to understand that Felix and Reed can't just go around thinking they can threaten people without consequences. I'm pretty sure she is afraid enough that she will at least talk to her husband. If he's the coward you say he is, he'll probably take it from there. I didn't think much of her plan, to be honest, and I didn't want to bring up the unpleasant possibility that she may have scared the Callahans into taking preemptive action against Brady and I. Elise loved her little role-playing games, and she was very pleased with herself over that one. I got a phone call that night from Brady too. He liked the whole thing and told me that we should send our malls out more in the future and scare away all of our competition. When I told him my concerns that the Callahans might panic and start thinking it was either us or them, he didn't think it was that funny anymore. So what do you think we should do, Jade? I don't want to just wait for them to make the first move. That shoulder still hurt, Brady? The one that Reed put a bullet through? I hope it does, so you can keep it in your mind that this isn't just entertainment here. I think you should remember that it isn't only the two of us that can get hurt by those guys. I think we need to set up a meeting with them right away and get it all settled. I'm not saying we give in to them, or even let them have anything. Just that we meet and let them know what options are still open right now. I'm all for seeing those two again, Jade. We can even talk to them if that's what you want. But after the talking gets done, if they still think they want to put us out of business, I think we should let them know that we'll be trying the same thing, only to put them totally out of business. All right, let me try to set something up. After I got off the phone with Brady, I called up my father and explained what Tessa and Elise had done and what I feared might happen. He got a kick out of it and told me that's exactly what I deserved for bringing women into my business affairs. He said that he'd find out who had the Callahan's ear and try to set something up. It turned out that Felix Callahan's personal attorney was a good friend of Mr. Beckett's, and a meeting was set up for 1 o'clock the following afternoon between Felix and myself at his lawyer's office. I went alone, and when I got there the lawyer told me Felix had called and would be a little bit late. He took me inside to his office, and we waited about 15 minutes before Felix finally showed up. The meeting didn't go very well, because Felix was determined to see himself as the victim in this whole thing. I let him rant on for a few minutes, and then I stood up to leave. Where you going? I'm not done saying my piece yet. Felix, you may not realize it yet, but I can assure you that you are done, and so is that brother of yours. People have tried to tell you that there are some people who don't respond well to your tactics. Your brother shot Brady because he was afraid of him. Well, he was right to be afraid. Brady was only going to beat him up for coming at him with a gun. Now, after being shot, he knows that a beating isn't enough. I wanted to come here and see if we could just end this before it got terminal, but now I realize that won't work for any of us. I'm afraid one of our wives is going to be wearing black before too much longer. Felix's lawyer was gasping for air when I finished talking. Being a lawyer, he wasn't used to plain talking. I could see in Felix's eyes that he knew I wasn't just talking. You be very careful from now on, Felix, because this is the last time I try talking sense to you. I walked out of the office and then the building. I drove over to Brady's and told him about having the meeting with Felix. I called Mr. Beckett from Brady's, and he had already heard a report from Felix's lawyer. He told me not to make threats in front of witnesses. Then, just before hanging up, he told me that he was pretty certain that Brady would be getting a phone call from Reed Callahan's attorney offering an out-of-court settlement for the shooting incident. It seemed, according to Mr. Beckett, that Reed had become very interested in making Brady a settlement offer after he had been rebooked on attempted murder charges the day before. This unusual action was taken after the district attorney's office had reviewed the original police reports from the lawn incident. Mr. Beckett didn't need to say that he had exerted some influence in that decision process. Brady was not to accept any offer without first checking with Mr. Beckett. The other good news was that the charges against me were being dropped and my bail money was being released. I wasn't sure about exactly how these things happened when Mr. Beckett got involved, but they almost always seemed to work out well for his friends. Brady, Mr. Beckett says not to do any settlement with Reed's lawyer until you run it by him. Reed has an attempted murder charge now and is hoping to do some deal with you to try to get the charges reduced or fixed. Brady acknowledged that he understood and would do what he'd been told. I left and drove back home. I told Elise that the meeting hadn't gone too well, but she was very pleased when I told her that the charge against me was being withdrawn. I got into the habit of being more careful about everything after that. I would check in with Elise several times a day and kept in closer touch with Brady too. It was a couple weeks before somebody decided to shoot holes in about 20 of the tires on my delivery trucks while they were parked overnight on a lot that I used. I sent Tessa, Elise, and Brady's kids on a trip over the Christmas holidays. They went down to Florida on the Greyhound bus. Brady didn't want to do that, but I told him I wasn't going to take care of things unless he agreed to get everyone out of the way first. On the 23rd of December, Brady and I waited in the woods for Felix and Reed to get back to one of their wood storage areas. When their truck pulled in and they got out to go in the little shed they had there, Brady and I opened fire on the shed. Our original plan had been to just scare them, but the longer we waited for them, the madder we both got. It was cold out there in the woods, and there was no way either of us could get comfortable. We both had M2 carbines that a friend had given me a month before. In total, we fired off a total of 60 of the .30 caliber rounds at that shed. When we were done, we picked up the expended shell casings and walked back to the car. We didn't know what had happened inside the shed, but just assumed the worst. We drove over to Uncle Donald's house afterwards and joined the poker game that was in progress. The rifles had been disposed of before we ever got near Uncle Donald's house. It turned out that the Callahans hadn't gotten a scratch on them from our little turkey shoot. As soon as the first shots were fired, both of them hit the floor and stayed down throughout the firing. What they had gotten, though, was a better appreciation of just how serious Brady and I took their threat to us. I got a call from Mr. Beckett telling me that the Callahans wanted another meeting. This time it was to be held at Mr. Beckett's office, and it would also include Felix's lawyer and Brady and Reed too. It was set for 2 days before the new year, and Brady and I got there at 11 a.m., just like we'd been told. I was surprised to see my father there too. "Yutch, Mr. Beckett asked me to search you and Brady before you go in there. Felix and Reed are already in there, and I searched them too." It took only a minute for him to pat the two of us down. He seemed pretty competent at it, and I wondered where he'd picked up that particular skill. When he turned around and led us into Mr. Beckett's office, I noticed a strange bulge over by the cuff on his right pants leg. My father was wearing an ankle holster. For some reason, that made me less nervous about the whole meeting. If there was one thing I was certain of, it was that my father would never allow Brady and I to be hurt unless it was him doing the hurting. I hadn't done anything to make him mad lately, so I wasn't worried about him being mad at me. We were all sitting at a big conference table. Felix and Reed and Felix's lawyer on one side and Brady and I on the other. Mr. Beckett sat at the head of the table, and my dad stood by the door. Felix's lawyer started things off with a brief recap of everything that had happened so far. He started at the beginning, and when he started to wind down, he got to the part where my tires had been shot up by person or persons unknown, and so had the shed with the Callahans in it. Brady and I both smiled at the mention of that. He said that he and his clients had come over today in order to see if something couldn't be framed that could bring a cessation of these unpleasant and non-productive actions. He was followed by Mr. Beckett, who also said he deplored the dangerous escalations that he had witnessed in this disagreement. He stated that the shooting incident at the Callahan storage lot was particularly disturbing because that amount of shooting meant that someone was seriously attempting to kill the Callahans. He then cleared his throat while he stared at Brady and I for a minute. "I think all four of you are lucky that there was nobody killed in that little escapade. I would never attempt to foster the interests of anyone who had committed such an act if it had resulted in a death or in multiple deaths. Like Mr. Trainer, I am hopeful that we can prevent a continuation of these destructive actions." Felix decided that he would speak next. "I have to say that I don't want to go through any repeat of what happened to Reed and I a week ago. Reed and I will reimburse you for the cost of replacing those tires, Jade. We admit that this whole acquisition thing was a bad idea from the start. My wife has been sitting at home crying every time she hears a car backfire or some kid tips over a garbage can. It isn't any fun coming home to find her hiding in one of the bedrooms with all my kids either. I want this thing to be over so that all of us can go back to leading normal lives again." I decided that I would speak next. "Felix, I appreciate it that you want things to get back to normal. I appreciate it that you are willing to step forward and pay for the tires that were shot out. The problem I'm having is that Brady and I had to go to all the trouble and expense of sending our wives and Brady's kids away for what we thought was their own safety. We only took that step because we believed we were about to bring this whole situation to a conclusion where we wouldn't have to worry about it ever coming back. A permanent solution, you could call it, I guess. How do we know that this would be permanent? What assurance can you give me that this won't start up again sometime in the future? You'll just have to take my word for it is all. I've had enough of this, Jade. I won't want to start it up again. Next time you might aim lower, or else reload, and come inside the shed to make sure. We got the message. You and Brady won't be screwed with, and you can't be scared. We aren't killers. We know when we're in over our heads. Felix, if it was just up to me, I'd be inclined to believe you. There would still be the matters of our out-of-pocket expenses and of Brady's being shot. I haven't heard you address either of those issues. Well, if we're going to discuss those matters, we'd have to include those serious charges that were filed against Reed for defending himself at our house. Reed and I were thinking that we'd pay Brady $25,000 if he would call it quits, and if someone would put in a good word about Reed's case, or maybe talk to somebody about dropping it altogether. I don't think that will cut it, Felix, not by a long ways. I happen to know that $75,000 would do the trick and make all of Reed's legal problems disappear. Mr. Beckett shot me a warning look, but I kept my own eyes on Felix and Reed. We could call it a transfer of interest, Felix. It's tax deductible to your company. You write up a list of all my accounts that you've stolen over the years, and I'll sell them to you for that amount. All nice and legal. I don't need any tax deductions, Jade. So let's make it $50,000, okay? How about we make it $90,000? Felix, you can either take it or leave it. I was thinking that Felix wasn't being very sincere with me. He says he wants to settle the thing, but now he's trying to chisel me down. So I assigned him a 20% penalty for lack of sincerity. Felix's lawyer put his hand on Felix's hand, which was balled into a fist on the conference table top. He leaned over and whispered something in Felix's ear. Felix shook his lawyer off and stood up from the table. $75,000, and that's really it. I can't stand the way you always have to have things go the way you decide, you and Brady. If it wasn't for my wife and kids, you wouldn't see a dime of my money. All right, Felix, I'll take the $75,000 for you. But I'm not lifting a finger to help Reed out of his troubles. And Felix, if it wasn't for your wife and kids, you'd already be dead. Screw you, Jade. Now I won't pay you a penny. You guys go ahead and try something again and just see what happens to you. With that, Felix and Reed and the lawyer all stood up and left the meeting. My father and Mr. Beckett were both upset with me, but Brady understood. We couldn't afford to close this thing out until we were sure that the Callahans had no fight left in them. Brady and I left together, just like we'd come. At 3 in the morning, somebody dropped 20 strings of Chinese firecrackers all tied together over the Callahans' back fence. That resulted in 3,000 small explosions in a 10-second period, assuming, of course, that everyone fired. Brady and I never knew if they all went off. Ray was too busy running away to get back in his car to say just how many there had been. He said there were a lot, though. Mr. Beckett called me about 10 a.m. and told me that Felix wanted to talk to me again. I called Felix at the number he'd left with Mr. Beckett. He was at his wife's sister's house, and he begged me to let him take my original offer. I heard a lot of crying going on in the background. Felix, take the money over to Mr. Beckett's office. As soon as that's done, it's over. I'll make sure that Reed's case is dropped. But if you or he ever screws with me or mine again, it won't be over until I see the two of you buried. And I mean that literally, Felix. Then he did something else that was strange. He asked me to repeat that to his wife, the part about it being over. Sheila, it's Jade. You'll be happy to know that Felix and Reed and Brady and I have all settled our differences. All the unpleasantness is over. From now on, Felix and I will just be business competitors, that's all. I hope all of you have a happy new year too. Brady and I insisted that Mr. Beckett take $25,000 for his good offices throughout the troubled time. Brady kept $37,500, and I got $12,500. Brady paid for my tires out of his end, saying his extra was for the shooting, and the tires had gotten shot too. After paying taxes, none of us really made out that well. Elise and Tessa and the kids got back from Florida well-rested, tanned, and excited about their adventure. Elise was happy to find out that everything had been ironed out, until she learned about how the ironing was done. She called Sheila Callahan and apologized to her for the firecrackers and the shooting incident, complaining that it was difficult to stop men when they insisted on playing their stupid games. She told Sheila that she really hoped that all the unpleasantness was really over and that things were finally getting back to normal. Felix and Reed both kept their end of the bargain, and we saw little of them over the years. Felix is still alive today and living outside Hartford. Reed died in an automobile accident in the early 90s. The Callahan brothers filed for bankruptcy protection in the mid-'80s, victims of high fixed overhead, too much leveraging, and crippling interest rates. Brady told me one time that he and Tessa were lying in bed one night, and he started telling her about the night we shot up the little shed with Felix and Reed inside. She knew about the event, but hadn't heard the story of how it all took place before. Brady told me that Tessa showed a morbid curiosity about how Brady felt when he thought he'd killed 2 men. When they were done talking, Brady said Tessa became a sexual dervish in bed and almost killed him with her ferocity. She told him she hadn't been that horny since the time she'd shot him on her porch when he'd cheated on her. I think it was all an act, and Tessa was trying to scare Brady. Brady thinks she was serious and says he tries hard never to bring the subject up with her anymore. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.